Good afternoon, committee. We'll call the meeting to order. First item of business, we're going to open the hearing on House Bill or Senate Bill 127. Reviser Wagner, would you brief us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hope everyone can hear me all right today. Good afternoon, committee. Senate Bill 127 would make various changes to driver's license statutes, starting with increasing the age of eligibility to renew driver's licenses online to 64 years old. The bill would also allow online renewal for CDLs. It would allow for driver's license renewals and expiration notices to be sent electronically. It would extend certain dates to renew expired licenses that have expired within the past year, and would modify eligibility requirements for restricted driving privileges. Section 1, starting off, would increase the eligible age for electronic renewal for licenses, and also allow for electronic renewal for CDLs. Current law allows this for the age range of 21 to 49 if the applicant certifies that they've had an eye exam within the past year. There are certain other conditions such as sharing medical information with the division to ensure that. So the bill, as I said, would extend that online renewal to people in the age range of 21 to 64 years of age, so anyone less than 65 years old and older than 21. Additionally, CDLs would be able to be renewed online unless the CDL has a hazardous waste or hazardous materials endorsement on it. Additionally, a person seeking to renew a CDL license online would have to provide the division with a valid medical examiner certificate and proof of completion of the Truckers Against Trafficking training. Going on to Section 2, this would allow the division to send the required notices for license expirations or renewals. That notice has to be sent 30 days prior to the license expiring. This would allow them to send that notice by email if authorized by the person. This section would also allow any licensee whose driver's license who's expired after March 12th, 2020 and before March 31st, 2021 to have until June 30th of 2021 to renew such licensee's license. Section 3 would do a similar change for identification card holders. The range would again be any card that expired after March 12th, 2020 and before March 31st of 2021 and give them until June 30th of 2021 to renew the ID card. And finally, Section 4 would remove a disqualifier for obtaining restricted driving privileges, which this section should look familiar. It was a part of a bill we've heard earlier this session. It would remove the disqualifier for those individuals who have previously received a state suspension as a result of a driving while suspended conviction. The Senate Committee of the Whole also adopted an amendment into this section that would eliminate application fees associated with those requests for restricted driving privileges. Finally, a couple more notes. The effective date on this would be the Kansas Register. Upon publication in the Register, and also the bill, as is, passed the Senate 39-0. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Questions for the reviser? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Representative.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to turn the clock back a little bit here. It was on the House floor, February 2nd of 2018. We heard a House bill. It was 2606 at the time. And that's what brought the original online ability to renew driver's licenses. And at the time, the individuals had to be at least 21 years old, but less than 50 years old. So changing this from 21 to 64, I believe also aligns us with the 6-year term driver's licenses, because after 65 and above, I believe you go to 4 years. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so at the time, I had brought an amendment to the original one of 2606 back in 2018 session to actually change that up to essentially what this does, 21 to 64 years old. But I was told that I was asked not to do it for some possible other ramifications. And I would wonder if you would have any insight of why it was not a good idea in 2018, but suddenly now it may be. Is anything changed that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, but that might be a good question for the division if they are aware. This was brought on their behalf, so they might have some insight into that.
Okay, and hopefully they'll be here today. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Wagner. First proponent I have is Kent Selk and Lacey Black with the Kansas Department of Revenue. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Kent Selk. I'm the Senior Manager for the Division of Vehicles for Driver's Licensing. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you as a proponent on Senate Bill 127. Chris summed it up pretty good, and then I'll answer Representative Delberding's question here. Senate Bill 127 obviously is going to increase the online age from that 50-year range up to 64, and yes, it does align us with the 4-year license. I do believe at the time the optometrists and optometry committees were maybe a little more hesitant to have that age above 50, but since this has been a pilot program now for 2 years it's run, we've talked to them, we keep in good contact with them, and they've decided that it's okay, that they don't have any concerns with increasing the age. And I do believe that was the issue back in 2018. With this, we are also adding in commercial driver's licensing. We met with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and keep close tabs with them. Commercial driver's licensing can be renewed online with the exception of people who have a hazardous material endorsement. Those individuals have to test every time that they renew their license, so they're going to have to come in the office and also provide their extended proof. And this also, when you renew your CDL, you do have to provide your proof of your medical card and that you have taken the Truckers Against Trafficking training with the statute with the AG's office. If there's any questions on that right now, I can answer them, or I could kind of finish up the rest of this if that answered Representative Delberding's question.
I appreciate you addressing that. The optometrist one makes perfect sense. And it was just a clarification I wanted to hear, because I think this is a good bill, and I appreciate it being brought in here, but I was trying to figure out what changed in the last couple of years, so thank you.
You're welcome, sir. The division would also like to open up having electronic renewal cards ran. Currently, right now, everybody knows it's that pretty bright yellow postcard that comes and has so much words on it, you can't hardly read it front and back. This would give the individual an opportunity to opt in. They would do this at the driver's license office when they renew now. It would be a question if they want to opt in to receive electronic notification. Currently, we want to do that through email just because there's no charge. I know text messages has been brought up before. I don't think we're opposed to it maybe in the future, but with some issues maybe with billing, we didn't want to cause a problem with our customers. So I just wanted to bring that up. I know that was a question I do believe last time we were talking about this. So this would allow us to then send more notifications in more detail, especially around what documents to bring, and notify the individual when they're about 12 months out, because you can renew 12 months in advance if your license is expiring. This wouldn't cost us as much, obviously, in this mailing on a postcard. So that is the other portion of this bill that we have. And we also mentioned the Executive Order of 2070, which is allowing individuals to renew their driver's license till the end of June of this year, who expired on March 12th of 2020. I'm sorry, that fun year we had. I get my 2020, 2021 mixed up. So it makes sure that if that executive order does expire in the statute, to provide those individuals time to get in here till the end of June to renew their identification card or driver's license. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Are there questions for Mr. Black? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Kent Selk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Lacey Black. I am the manager of Driver Solutions for the Kansas Division of Vehicles, and I appear today as a proponent of Senate Bill 127. The portion of the bill that I'll be talking about is the restricted license portion. So on page 14 of the bill, B lines 9 through 11, that is the section that would be we would be removing that verbiage from KSA 8-2110. So removing that would allow more drivers to be approved for restricted driving privileges. Currently, if the division receives an application for restricted privileges, we review the driving record to verify that the driver is eligible. And one of the reasons for denial is if the driver has a stayed suspension that has not been served for a driving while suspended conviction. So if they have that on the record, we immediately deny them. If we remove this verbiage, it would allow the division to accept the application, start that 90-day suspension, and then at the end of that, go ahead and approve them for the restricted privileges. So if this bill were to pass, there are currently 650 individuals who would be eligible for the restricted privileges. And then just for your reference, Senate Bill 100, House Bill 2217, and House Bill 2193 are similar to this bill. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Are there questions for Ms. Black? Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm trying to just understand the mechanics on this. So is the problem that if they've lost their license, they can't serve the process of the suspended license? Or, I mean, what happens now to these people, to the 650 people?
Yes, sir. So currently, those individuals that would be approved with this bill passage, they have previously received a driving while suspended conviction, and tied to that is a 90-day suspension. And the way that the statute reads right now, if they have that driving while suspended conviction on record and they haven't served that 90 days, we have to deny them for the restricted privileges. So passing this would just allow us to go ahead and run that 90 days and then put them on the restricted privileges after that.
So they're caught in kind of a no man's land is what you're saying right now. And so how do we do it now? I mean, obviously you have a workaround right now to do it somehow, don't you? Or can they just never drive again for the rest of their natural life?
Yes, sir. So now they can get their privileges back. They just can't get the restricted privileges. So now these individuals have to pay their tickets in full completely. And then we would run that 90 days and then they would just have their full privileges back at that point. So this would just be allowing those drivers to run that 90 days now and get them on that restricted license so that they can pay their tickets over a year.
So it's a way to get them back to work basically, and it makes it easier for them to pay their fines and whatever things they have. Am I
Yes, sir.
understanding right?
Yes, sir.
Are there further questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to follow up on the previous rep's questions, but where you said they could pay it over the course of a year, what happens if over the course of a year the fines do not get paid?
Yes, sir. So currently, if you are approved for restricted privileges, we put you on a 1-year restriction. And if you do not pay during that year, then we just resuspend you at the end. And the way it does read, you can only be approved one time for this 1-year restricted license. So they would just be resuspended at the end of that year until they pay in full.
Okay, so by striking the language on that we're talking about, it would not affect anything long-term then?
No,
Whereas
sir.
if they did not pay, they would get suspended at that point?
Yes.
Thank you.
Are there further questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Ms. Black. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Next, I have Marilyn Harp, Kansas Legal Services. Welcome to the committee.
I'm Marilyn Harp, Director of Kansas Legal Services. You've seen me before about this. When this was House Bill 2193, the part of it that we are most concerned about is the ability of folks who have received a driving while suspended and therefore can't participate in this program. It would open up this program to many people. And it's an important thing to return them to being able to drive into employment. You have my written testimony. I'm in the interest of time, just let you know that this addition to the commercial driver's license bill is what you all passed in 2190 in the House Bill 2193, but was below the line, so it wasn't voted on.
Are there any questions? Seeing none? I have no other proponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as a proponent? Please come forward. Senator Faust, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I rise in support of the Senate Bill 127. I believe your committee has heard this issue for a long time now. I know I've been working on it for the past 7 years. Marilyn Harp with Kansas Legal Services, we were together years ago when and advocated for the current program within the Department of Labor, which allows for the restricted driver's license program that we are speaking of now. Mr. Chairman, the two, I was, Senate Bill 100, as you heard, is in part of this legislation, working with the chairman, Senator Mike Peterson in the Senate Transportation Committee. I was able to offer an amendment on the floor when we worked this bill on the floor and add in the $25 fee to apply, or removing that fee to apply for the restrictive driver's license program. But we left out a couple of pieces that day on the floor, but they are in this bill here that would allow those who are driving while suspended. They are then put in that revoked status. They then, current law says they cannot apply for the restrictive driver's license program. So Senate Bill 127, from what you just heard here, would allow those individuals to do that. And then it also addresses a 90-day waiting period. I think the senator or representatives here spoke of this before, and I know that my police chief, Sheriff Jeff Easter, Gordon Ramsay, police chief of Wichita, others feel that if you've paid your fine in full, you should not have to wait another 90 days to get your driver's license reinstated. But again, Mr. Chairman, just to allow others who have just been driving, no DUIs, no other violations, but this bill would certainly help them participate in that program while making payments on their fines, driving legally. I think it's a win-win. So I appreciate your support for Senate Bill 127.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I didn't submit testimony. I will submit the written testimony for today. Thank you so much.
You. Are there any other proponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I have no opponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? I have one neutral. It's written only by Todd Flesher, Executive Director of the Kansas Optometric Organization. Bring that to your attention. Does anyone else wish to speak as neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 127 and open the hearing on Senate Bill 167. Revisor Wagner, would you brief us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 167 would classify certain public utility motor vehicles as authorized emergency vehicles. So beginning with Section 1, that would include motor vehicles operated by authorized persons of electric or natural gas public utility to be included in that definition of authorized emergency vehicle. Additionally, the Senate Committee of the Whole adopted a floor amendment to also include vehicles operated by providers as defined in KSA 17-1902, wireless infrastructure providers, and wireless service providers that are defined in 66-2019. Further, just to clarify what providers is defined as in 17-1902, it'd be any local exchange carrier, telecommunications carrier, or a video services provider. So the being defined as an authorized emergency vehicle would grant those motor vehicles certain operational rights under 8-1506. KSA 8-1520A would also provide a violation for the unlawful passing of a stopped authorized emergency vehicle. KSA 8-1530 requires drivers approaching an authorized emergency vehicle to yield if the vehicle is using lights or sirens. And KSA 8-1541 requires pedestrians to yield the right of way to authorized emergency vehicles. So those are current laws, but that's kind of what defining those vehicles would allow for or violate people for. Section 2 then would exempt those motor vehicles operated by authorized persons of electric or natural gas utility or by providers that I already described from the Board of County Commissioners authority to designate such vehicles as authorized emergency vehicles. There are certain other vehicles listed in that, but essentially that just means that the Board of County Commissioners would not need to designate those vehicles as emergency vehicles for them to have all of those rights and duties I've already described. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Other questions for the revisor? Seeing none? Thank you. First proponent I have is Senator Ethan Corson. Welcome to the committee.
Is this on? Thank you. Thank you for having this hearing. My name is Ethan Corson, State Senator. I want to thank the Chairman, Vice Chair, Ranking Member, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony in support of Senate Bill 167. What this bill is it's a straightforward worker safety measure. It was unanimously passed by the Senate Transportation Committee and unanimously passed by the full Senate. And the reason I introduced this legislation is I was motivated to do so after hearing from utility workers about the many dangers and the near misses that they face while doing their already difficult job on Kansas roadways. We indeed had an incident that another proponent will talk about right here in Topeka, where an Evergy service vehicle was rear-ended by a distracted driver. And so I want to be clear about what SB 167 does is it adds these utility and telecommunication vehicles when they are engaged in emergency repairs to the classification of emergency vehicles. Enacting this legislation will put Kansas in line with 20 other states, including Missouri and Nebraska. And my district borders Missouri, so I hate when we are behind Missouri in anything. So that's another reason I want to make sure that we get this law passed this session. But it would include utility and telecom vehicles in Kansas's move over law, which Kansas currently covers police, firefighters, paramedics, tow truck operators, and highway maintenance workers under that law. And what that protection would provide is that when one of these vehicles is stationary on the side of the road conducting an emergency repair and they have their flashing lights on, that an approaching vehicle would have to, if it's a multi-lane road and they're able to safely do so, move over a lane. If they're not able to safely do so, or if they're on a one-lane road, they would have to slow down and use due caution. As February storms demonstrated, our utility and telecommunications workers braved the toughest conditions imaginable to keep on our light, our heat, and our ability to communicate with our loved ones. And passing this legislation will provide these workers with a small measure of additional protection as they go about an already dangerous job. This common sense legislation is supported by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Kansas City Board of Public Utilities, Kansas Electric Cooperatives, Evergy, Kansas Municipal Utilities, Black Hills Energy, Kansas Gas Service, Kansas Electric Power Cooperative, Sunflower Electric Power, and Atmos Energy. I respectfully ask that the committee advance this bill to the full House so we can protect the safety of these vital workers. And before I close, I want to mention, I know there are some conferees are suggesting tweaks to this language that they believe would accomplish this same purpose. If it is the committee's wish, we would be glad to work with the committee on an amendment if the committee wishes. We prefer the language offered by the League of Municipalities in their testimony. But whatever the committee decides, I believe that it is very important that we pass this legislation out this session so we can have these important protections in place as soon as possible. And with that, I would be glad to stand for questions at the appropriate time. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions for Senator Corson? Representative Delberdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate you coming here for this. In your statement, you actually, I hope I've got the right one here. We talked about emergency repairs to, in other words, this law is in effect when they're doing emergency repairs. Is that what I heard? Does it not work if they're not doing non-emergency repairs? If the bucket truck's in the road, they're up on the high line wires, they're doing routine maintenance, does this still apply?
The intent of the law was to protect them when they are out responding to these emergencies, often happen late at night in really rough conditions, and to provide that extra protection. It was not, the intent was not necessarily to provide it when they're doing just routine maintenance or routine service calls. The intent was to limit it to the situations when they're on the side of the road addressing an emergency and to provide that protection. I think just given the context of when these emergencies often happen, again, you think about when does your power go out, when are they out doing these repairs? It's often in conditions that make the roadways even more dangerous. So that's why we tried to capture that to, again, try to have it somewhat narrowly tailored, because I know that there may be some consternation about the idea of having these vehicles classified as emergency vehicles. And emergency vehicles also comes from the terminology of the existing statutes and of what is currently in Kansas's move over law.
Okay, I appreciate that. Because
Thank you for the question.
quite often you see it'd be a busy road, they're in a bucket truck, they're up there doing their work, whatever it may be, but not necessarily an emergency. But I think they still should have the same safety and courtesy of being required to people move over and get out of the way, because whether it's an emergency or not, you hit one of the vehicles, you're going to kill people. So
Right.
appreciate it.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just so that I understand your position correctly, I was looking through some of the other testimony of the neutral and the opponents. One of the neutral, it's going to be here in a minute, says that the powers that you've asked for in this bill talk about going through a red traffic signal, exceeding the maximum speed limits, proceeding through 2 toll booths. You don't see that as a necessary part of this bill, so you're very willing to work with the opponents to clarify what your needs are.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Representative, and that's absolutely correct. Again, we worked with the reviser on this. We believe that the bill as currently drafted is consistent with how other states have approached this, the 24 other states that have included this. That said, our intention is very much limited to when they are, again, pulled over on the side of the road, stationary, responding to emergency, flashing lights on. It has nothing to do with having these vehicles out driving through toll booths or driving through red lights or speeding. None of that is what the proponents of this bill are seeking. And so that's why I do say, if it is the wish of the committee to look at some of the language offered by the other conferees, and if the committee believes that that is more narrowly tailored to this situation I just described, we would be more than glad to work with the committee on that, because again, we do have the narrow focus that I outlined.
Any further questions? Seeing none? Oh, yes, there is. Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. So I want to be absolutely sure on this. When you say this is going to be classified as an emergency vehicle, the only time that you're saying that this is going to happen is when they're doing an emergency repair, correct, on the side of the road?
Yes, Mr. Representative, that's correct. To fall in the move over law as it is currently written, this would be a vehicle is stationary on the side of the road with their flashing lights on. And the reason they are stationary on the side of the road is they are conducting a repair, correct?
Okay. And when you say flashing lights, are they going to have flashing lights that are similar or in effect the same as, say, a KHP trooper or a city police vehicle?
They wouldn't. If you've seen the vehicles currently, they already have these lights. Most of them. I can't speak to every one of the proponents, but the ones that I'm familiar with, they already have these lights. The difference would be that the law enforcement and the emergency response vehicles have red. Typically, if you look at an Evergy truck or something of that nature, they don't have the red that we're all used to when you see a police car or an ambulance or something of that nature. So that would be the distinction.
So they're not going to change, because when I think of Evergy or Cox Communications or whatever type utility vehicle, they're usually white or some kind of amber, and they're usually just mounted on top, or they have their four-way flashers on. So they're not going to be at some point putting in red and blue lights in the grills or up, or have other extraneous lighting systems put on that are going to be that color. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's no intention to change the way that these vehicles currently have their lights and the colors of the lights. They already have the flashing lights that are, like you said, typically the white or the amber, and that is the intention, is to stay with those colors, and they're not trying or anticipating that they're going to try to mimic what a law enforcement or an ambulance or other first responder would look like, correct?
Okay. Is that language in the bill?
That specific language that says they will not do that,
No,
is that?
their lights will be either clear or amber?
There's nothing in the bill that specifies the color of the light. We could add that if the committee wished. I would just say, and again, I wouldn't want to represent that every single utility, telecom, natural gas company has said this directly, but in talking generally to the proponents, and including the ones I listed, I know that there's no intention to change anything with their existing lighting, be it the placement of the lighting or the color. But again, if the committee wanted to expressly put that prohibition in there, we would not have a problem with that. But I'm not aware that anyone intends to do that, because again, it is just this narrow protection to have them afforded that move over. Really, all we're trying to do is get them under the move over law. So approaching vehicles, again, have to either move over, or if they can't safely do that, slow down and use due care.
And could you indulge me for one more question? It's kind of a two-part question. Our troopers and sheriff deputies and local police, city police, they usually don't, when they're stopping people, put out cones that actually funnel the traffic into another lane unless it's a large accident or something like where they have to control the traffic to get around the wreckage. Don't most utilities that I've seen when they're out working put out those orange and white cones as a safety incentive to work around so that the traffic goes around their vehicles?
I've often seen that. I'm going to let another proponent who I think is better able to answer that specific question, because I know that anecdotally I've seen that, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to represent that they always do that or that that is a standard part of their practice. I want to be careful to stick with what I know. I know that I've seen exactly what you're describing, but I don't know what their specific training or what their manuals represent. I would again leave that to another conferee who may be able to more directly answer that. So I appreciate the question. I just don't want to overstep what I can affirmatively say with 100% confidence.
All right.
And you had a second part of was there a second?
I'll wait for that later.
Okay.
I'll come by that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our last
Thank
question,
you.
Representative Delperdang.
Two questions, if I may.
Okay.
First one concerning the in the use of during an emergency. How do I, as a driver running down the road, how do I know they're responding to an emergency call at that intersection versus doing routine work?
If they're stationary and they've got their flashing lights on, the assumption of the driver should be that they are responding to an emergency. If they're pulled over on the side of the road stationary with those lights on, they would be considered to be at that point falling under this emergency vehicle, which would then put them under the protection of the Kansas move over law.
Okay, and then the final question, what normally happens before an emergency vehicle shows up or a utility vehicle or anything is you have individuals, typically I've seen like USGS, they're the locators. If I'm going to go work on electric lines, they go out and locate where's the gas and the other stuff in that area. They too have yellow flashing lights on there. So is that going to be considered an emergency vehicle as well?
The way the statute reads, let me just refer to the statute if you'll give me just a moment. That's a good question. The language of the statute is pretty explicit. And it says, needed on motor vehicles are utilized for emergency repairs that are needed on electric utility or natural gas equipment to restore necessary services or ensure public safety, and motor vehicles operated by a provider or a wireless infrastructure provider or a wireless services provider.
But in the case of that USGS or Delperdang's locating service, I'm out there to assist the utilities, so to speak, of where's the other utilities in that area before they dive into it or get the backhoes out there.
And would you be employed by would the person, I think
No.
part of the determination,
They're contractors.
paid by the companies?
Yes, they are.
I would leave that one to the lawyers as to whether they would, I think it would determine, what would it be determined is what is the relationship between that person and the gas company or the electric company or the telecommunications company.
Because I'm more concerned about the poor police officer that stops there and now he's in the middle of this. And does he make the call yes or no, or what are we putting these guys in the middle of? Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next proponent I have is David Galvin, and he is presenting testimony that was John Garrettson's. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is David Galvin, and I do represent the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, local union 304 here in Topeka. I do thank you for allowing me to be here to testify in support of SB 167. Of course, as you've heard, SB 167 adds utility vehicles, whether they be electrical, gas, or telecom, to the classification of emergency vehicles when engaged in emergency repairs, restorations, or other work to ensure public safety. Obviously, these men and women do a dangerous job day in and day out. There are 100 things or more that can go wrong and cause a tragedy, and that is when conditions are optimal. It's not an exaggeration to say that most, if not all, of our utility workers out there have at least one near-miss experience. Unfortunately, those often don't get reported, so we don't often know how often they really come close to being hurt. Aside from countless near misses, this past summer, a distracted driver rear-ended an Evergy service vehicle on North Lyman Road here in Topeka. The serviceman was in the process of climbing into the bucket of the truck and fortunately was not seriously injured. Now, this was in broad daylight, routine job, not a middle of the night service restoration or emergency repair job. But we believe that adding utility vehicles to the emergency vehicle classification will hopefully help to reduce a bit of the risk that these important workers face and give them a greater sense of security as they do an already dangerous job in dangerous locations and conditions. We do currently have those move over laws here in Kansas that cover police, firefighters, and paramedics, tow truck operators, and highway maintenance workers. 20 plus other states, including Missouri and Nebraska, specifically include utility vehicles in their laws. And we do believe that SB 167 is an important step in ensuring the safety of Kansas workers. And we're proud to support it along with Evergy, Kansas Gas, and the other utilities that have shown their support of this legislation. I thank the committee for its time today and will stand for any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, I'd bring your attention to written testimony from Laura Lutz on behalf of Evergy. Does anyone else wish to speak as a proponent? Seeing none, I have listed Mr. Ed Klump as an opponent on behalf of the Sheriff's, Peace Officers, and Police Officers Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Ed Klump. I am here representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Peace Officers Association. I want to make very clear from the onset of this, we are not opposed. We absolutely support the goal of what this bill is aimed at. We are adamantly opposed, though, to the methodology of getting there that is proposed in this bill. We do not believe that non-emergency vehicles that are vehicles that are not responding to emergencies should be classified as emergency vehicles. And that's what this bill does. Whether you want to or not, whether they're going to use it or not, if you do this bill as it is written right now, you will be authorizing them to go out and put red lights and sirens on their vehicles and operate them as emergency vehicles. Now, they may not intend to do that. They may never do that, but you will be authorizing it by law if you pass the bill the way it's written. That is our opposition to this. We have some other concerns that I think the proponents will appreciate us pointing out. And I'm going to point out a solution to this that will do exactly what they're wanting to do, and we think in a better way than what the bill proposes. So there are different ways that we have addressed this in statute. The emergency vehicle move over law, as it's called, includes emergency vehicles, but also includes a subsection that covers maintenance vehicles on the roadway. People doing work on the roadway is the way it's worded. The deficiency in that law, if you look at the wording in that law, 8-1520A, you will see it covers on 2-lane roadways where the lanes are in opposite directions. So it would cover Tyler Street, if you're familiar with that, just the other side of Topeka Boulevard. Well, that's a one-way street. Let's say 8th Street as you go past Topeka Boulevard. It would cover that street. There is nothing in here that covers what those vehicles are supposed to do on a highway that has 2 or more lanes in the same direction. So technically, 8-1520A, we believe, is deficient in that area and needs to be fixed as well. So if you pass this as it is, it's going to apply on 2-lane roads. It's probably not going to apply on 4-lane roads. And we think they need that protection everywhere they are. We also think they need that protection not only when they're doing emergency repair work, as some of you have asked about. If they are on the roadway working and they have those lights on indicating they are working, they need to have this protection. That clause of emergency repairs is going to be a nightmare in prosecution. We are going to have to go in and prove that as an element of that violation, that that vehicle was there making emergency repairs. If we do it the other way, all we have to show is that they're stopped in the roadway, they're doing work, and they have those lights on. And that's all we have to do. It's a much easier proof. So on the second page of my testimony, I have put the statute that was passed just a couple of years ago for trash trucks. I think this does everything they're wanting to do. It covers 2-lane roads in opposite directions. It covers roadways with 2 or more lanes in the same direction. Keep in mind that 2 lanes in opposite directions, the wording in the emergency vehicle statute, won't cover a one-way street because they're not in opposite directions. I mean, there are critical flaws in that bill that we're trying to use to fix this. If we would just mimic this 8-15, 112, which is the trash truck one, it covers all of that stuff. It gives them everything that's in the statute they're trying to amend, and it gives them every protection they're talking about getting. And we would absolutely 100% support that. As written, when we put this in front of our legislative committees and all 3 of our associations, no one wanted to support this bill. Everyone wanted to oppose this bill the way it is written. Everyone wanted to support passing a law that will give the protection to these workers that they need when they're out here on the roadway. So that's why my testimony is framed in the way it is. I think the solution, there's another statute you can look at, is 8-1531. That is a statute specific to highway construction and maintenance vehicles. We looked at all those, and we think that 15,112 is the one that is the clearest. It's the most recent one passed. It's the most up to date. It covers all of these different roadway situations, and we think that is the one that is worthy of mimicking. We do think we need to go in sometime, whether it's now or later, and fix this one on emergency vehicles. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll stand for questions.
Other questions for Mr. Clump? Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking on page 2 of the bill, and I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm reading this, and for some reason it doesn't come out quite the same, but I guess I just need a clarification. If I look on page 2, number 1, any vehicle designated as an authorized emergency vehicle prior to the effective date may continue to operate. The ownership of such a vehicle remains unchanged, and the use of such vehicle for purposes for which such vehicle was designated unchanged, except then it says the following vehicle shall not be required to be designated by the Board of the County Commissioners, the fire department, or the police vehicle that are publicly owned. All right, so what you're saying, it seems to me it is almost the opposite. So would you explain what this is saying and why does that not meet what you are saying?
Subsection B of the statute that's being revised in the bill is the provision about, subsection C is the provision about where the Board of Commissioners can authorize an emergency vehicle. What that section about the police vehicles and the fire vehicles is they do not have to have that authorization from the county commission. They are by their nature an emergency vehicle, okay? So they don't have to, we don't have to go to the county commission and have our police vehicles, fire department doesn't have to go to county commission and get their fire department vehicles declared to be emergency vehicles. They are by statute. The vehicles that typically this designation is given by county commissions would be, for example, in some jurisdictions, and not so much anymore, but it used to be that there was a lot of jurisdictions did not have those jaws of life and all that equipment that fire departments typically have today to extricate a person trapped in a vehicle. And so the county commissions would actually authorize wreckers to operate as an emergency vehicle, red light and siren, to get to that scene quickly so we could pull cars apart and pull doors off and whatever to extricate people. So, and there's other areas where the county commissions authorize certain emergency vehicles for various reasons.
Okay, that would be also fire department vehicles? You know, when you look at those lines, you know, I guess I'm just trying to decide, why is this so out of line with what it is you think we should have for emergency vehicles?
Because what the proponents are needing and what they're saying they're wanting is a move over law. They're not saying they want to be an emergency vehicle for the purposes of responding to do their work. That's what an emergency vehicle response is responding, red light and siren, to get to the place where we're going to do our work. And that's not what they're needing. They're wanting the move over portion of this. This law that they're trying to amend to do that, as I pointed out, is deficient over these other laws that we've done more recently to address this very same issue with trash trucks who are working in the roadway, with highway construction and maintenance vehicles who are working in the roadway. And those are more specific and actually give more protections than the emergency vehicle statute does. And for those reasons, we think this is better suited because it doesn't statutorily give them the authority to run red light and siren to respond to where they're going to work, but it gives them everything they're asking for and more as far as protection on the roadway where they're working. That's where we stand.
So does this mean you need one giant amendment?
I would suggest that you take what is in my second page, the one on the trash trucks. You could just take that, you take out the trash trucks and you put in the definitions of the utility vehicles they are proposing and make a new statute, or you amend this one with 2 sections, either way, whatever the revisor wants to do. But either way, this gives them better protections than they have if you do it under the emergency vehicle statute.
Okay.
Not that we don't need to fix the emergency vehicle statute, we do. But that's another issue, whether we fix it now or fix it later.
Okay, so this is what you were saying in a way, this is needed, but you.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so it's.
We absolutely need to take care of the problems they are facing as they're out here on the highways and the roadways doing their work on these utilities. We absolutely need to have a move over law that gives them those protections, the same as we have trash trucks, maintenance vehicles, and construction vehicles.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helgerson.
Ed, did you provide that information to the Senate committee?
We did not. We did not testify at the Senate committee, and I'll tell you why. I think that's a fair question. I think I even put it in my written testimony. We were unclear on exactly what the issue was they were trying to fix and what the rationale was behind it. And at that time, of course, it was only the electric and gas companies. And so it was more narrow than it is in the amended version. Before we prepared our testimony for your committee, we had looked at the testimony given in the Senate committee and fully understood from their written testimony that it was this move over portion they were trying to achieve.
Representative Dale Perdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here, Ed. Just wanted to read one part. I've got a question that's burning on me here, but motor vehicles operated by a provider of telecommunication services, a wireless infrastructure provider, or a wireless service provider. Would you agree that that would include the state of Kansas?
Well, it references 2 statutes where those terms are defined, and without looking at those statutes and see how they define that, I couldn't answer that question. That'd probably be a good revisor question.
Okay. I'm thinking the state of Kansas provides all of that, but what I was leading to is on the testimony where he was referencing KSA 18-15, 112. And it just makes the question that, again, state of Kansas, if we do what you're asking, is that going to throw them little John Deere utility vehicles running around the campus here with flashing lights on as suddenly emergency vehicles?
Well, I don't think it will if you use the language the proponents are proposing, because they have specific definitions for these utility vehicles they're trying to cover. And that would not be included, I don't think, I haven't looked at those statutes, but I don't think that would be included in those definitions. The definitions of those types of utility vehicles are going to be in Chapter 8. So I don't think it would include those type of utility vehicles.
Thank you.
Good question, though.
Further questions? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I hate having people behind me.
You're gonna love it. It seems to me, back in my other life when I did this, that there's a, and I don't know if it's still there or not, there's a statute that defined what an emergency vehicle was, and that the two things it had to have was a red light and siren for it to be designated as an emergency vehicle.
Not quite that simple, but you're pretty close, yes. It does require certain equipment.
And I'm kind of using the same tack that you're on. Maybe we're probably diverging just a little, but I agree with you. I think all of this could be eliminated, back and forth on this, because from what I'm listening, from what I've heard from the testimony so far, is that they don't want to be classified as an emergency vehicle like a state trooper or a sheriff, you know, a marked unit, what we would call a marked unit. So it seems to me you need to change the name of what they're going to call that. And I would just put utility vehicle instead of an emergency vehicle, a utility vehicle / emergency repairs.
I would urge you not to just use utility vehicle. I think the definitions or the designations they have in their proposal for the type of vehicles they want to cover is very finely defined in other statutes. And I think if you just use the word utility vehicle, it's too ambiguous, and then we're going to cover the types of situations that Representative Alperdang was talking about with these little four-wheel utility vehicles you see driving around.
I understand that, but once you get into emergency vehicles,
this is what
you and I are going to think.
This is why we oppose putting this in the emergency vehicle statute. We support putting it in a separate statute fashioned after the trash hauler statute, because it gives them everything they need. It's very well defined what vehicles we're talking about. To me, when you put it in a separate statute, it also makes it clearer to the public that they are to yield to those vehicles. It can be better used in public service announcements and things like that, because if it's just mixed in with emergency vehicles, a lot of people are not going to see that and think emergency vehicle.
And the other point, when the other proponents were talking, and the other thing I wanted to bring up, which is what I brought up about the cones, where you could, you know, move that traffic over to another lane by putting the cones out. But just the fact that you're designated as a emergency vehicle, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, and have lights going, does not preclude that you're not going to be involved in a traffic accident, because I can tell you two instances, one of them being me and another state trooper, where clear day, sitting on the side of the road, working a traffic accident, car came over to the hill, hit that state trooper right, and if he did not turn around and see that car actually coming and jumped out of the way and told the people in the car in front of him to get out.
You're absolutely correct. There is nothing we can do that's going to guarantee that. We get dozens of police vehicles a year across this state that are demolished in these same types of collisions that we're talking about.
And they didn't have any cones out.
But we didn't have any cones out, but we've got the law to protect us.
That's right.
But and it is much better under that law than it used to be. And that's what these people deserve as well.
Right. I think you're on the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last question, Representative Ballard.
Just to follow up on what you're asking, you said that if we do emergency equipment, there's certain equipment needed, and the two of you were a little off on that one. So do you need this certain equipment, whatever it is, if you go with the trash trucks?
In the trash truck vehicle, or if you look at that about the third line down, it talks about displaying vehicular hazard warning signal lamps as required by 8-1722. If you look at, I think it's 8-1531, they reference lighting equipment that's required, I believe, by Department of Transportation regulations. Is that right? Something like that. Anyway, there's a regulatory thing that designates their lights, which is probably closer to what we're talking about with these types of utility vehicles. I don't know without looking at them, and I don't know the utility business, so.
Fine, thank you.
Plump,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well done. I have no other opponents listed. Does anyone else wish to speak as an opponent? I have two neutrals. First, Wendy Stark, Kansas League of Municipalities. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to present testimony on Senate Bill 167. We do support the underlying principle of the bill. We appreciate the need for protection to ensure the safety of those working to repair and maintain vital utilities, and also of citizens in proximity to this needed and often dangerous work. However, we do believe that there are collateral consequences of designating these types of motor vehicles. For example, Representative Francis mentioned there are various traffic laws that do not apply to emergency vehicles when they're displaying the proper lighting, and that is ignoring all parking or standing rules, proceeding past a red or stop signal or stop sign, exceeding the maximum speed limits so long as the driver does not endanger life or property, disregarding regulations governing direction of movement or turning in specified directions, or proceeding through toll booths or on roads or bridges without stopping. Another concern that we have is that Senate Bill 167 expanded to also include telecommunications and other wireless communication providers. And these vehicles would not be required to go through the process of designation by the Board of County Commissioners as authorized emergency vehicles. There are at least 3 different move over statutes, and one of the things that I think we've all gotten by coming together today with this hearing is that there are many different approaches that we can take to address the concerns that I believe that Senator Corson intended with that move over and the protection of these utility workers. Our suggestion is to consider substituting 167 by amending the language in KSA 8-1520, the Kansas Move Over statute, to include the additional groups, and that is on page 2 of my testimony. Mr. Klump brought up another way to amend the waste truck statute. Another suggestion that I actually heard in a committee meeting earlier this year here in this committee was Representative Vice Chairman Delberding's bill, House Bill 2164. Our suggestion would actually protect anyone working on a utility at any time, regardless of whether or not that's an emergency. And our testimony also suggests working with the reviser to make any of these technical amendments for lights, or if it needs to be amended, that it has to be the, I believe it would just be adding to the yellow flashing lights, and possibly amending 8-1531. And again, we would be happy to work with anyone to make this the best bill possible, and want to thank Senator Corson for bringing forward this bill to address the safety and caution of utility workers and others that are out in our communities. And we respectfully ask the committee to consider more narrowly tailored legislation to alert the public to stationary vehicles and to secure the safety of utility workers carrying out emergency repairs on electric utility or natural gas equipment before passing the legislation out of this committee. Thank you, and I stand for any questions.
Are there questions? Representative Ballard.
Just a clarification. So what I hear you saying is that you really think this is needed. You just need to tailor it to be more specific, and either the statutes 815-31 or 815-20, but your overall feeling is it is needed.
It is needed to have a move over statute, and we believe that the intent of this bill is for the move over, not the designation of emergency vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there further questions? Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a new person on this committee, would it be possible to ask legislative research for some more clear definitions on the two different designations that we're currently talking about, the move over statutes and the emergency vehicle designation?
I'm sure there would. Ms. Shelley, are you there?
Certainly. So you're requesting just the wording of the definitions that would apply?
Yes, I'm curious, like in rural communities, a volunteer fireman on his way to the station in a big hurry, generally in their private vehicles, if they fall into anything like this. I understand the utilities need for this, and as we're addressing this, I just wonder if we could clean up several things.
We'd be happy to provide those definitions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions?
Seeing none. Next, I have Jay Hall with Kansas
Association of Counties. Welcome to the committee. I guess we'll consider his testimony written only, and you will find that in your packet. Does anyone else wish to speak on Senate Bill 167? Seeing none, committee, we had scheduled to have a presentation by the county treasurers. They need at least 30 minutes, and that runs over our time limit that we can do, so we're going to postpone that. My apologies to them, but we will reschedule them and get them in to talk to us. The only thing else I have, committee, is minutes have been sent to you on February 24th and 25th, March 10th and 11th. I would entertain a motion to approve. Representative Helgerson. Seconded by Representative Ballard. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? You may close, I'm sorry.
Close.
You've heard him renew his motion to approve the minutes. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Committee, tomorrow we do plan to work Senate Bill 36. And we have a presentation from Mr. Steve Hewitt, who is Executive Officer of the Kansas Turnpike Authority. With that, we are adjourned.